One woman's crusade at the State House could save Native American lives and solve crimes. Plus, the battle over school funding reaching a full boil. But first, from drug to medicine, is marijuana finally taking that trip in Kansas? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. Lots of action coming out of the State House this week, but it's not the fight over school funding or even transgender athletics that's making the biggest headlines. It's a historic debate and vote on medical marijuana in the Kansas House last Thursday.
In fact, I have a strong opinion not to call it medical marijuana any more than I say medical methadone or medical methamphetamine or medical heroin. No such thing.
Kansans are tired of waiting on Kansas being last.
Everyone wanted to have their say, and more than one lawmaker wanted to change the bill.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment.
120 some pages long, it would allow Kansans to get a prescription for medical marijuana from a doctor they've been seeing for at least 6 months. They would get the drug from a state-licensed dispensary. Representative Gail Finney introduced the first medical marijuana bill in Kansas back in 2009.
It's an exciting day that I didn't think I would see happen in a long time.
She wasn't alone in her excitement.
You know, we've been for years wanting to debate this on the House floor and haven't been able to have that debate. So it was great being able to have it today, very historic day, and then felt really great to see it pass, and with a lot of Republican support too.
Many of those votes coming from conservative Republicans like Troy Waymaster, who in previous years opposed a debate on medical marijuana.
That it needed to go through the committee process. That's what happened today.
Citing a friend who needed medicinal marijuana, Thursday he spoke in favor of legalization.
And the last resort for her was actually to go to Colorado and actually take medicinal marijuana just to simply ease the pain.
Many Republicans said they were responding to what their constituents wanted, but some still couldn't support the issue.
I think they're putting people in a bad situation when they're not able to use it legally by the federal government. I'm an officer of the court, I'm an attorney.
The final vote was 79 to 42 in favor of legalizing medical marijuana. That was in the House. The bill now heads to the Kansas Senate. State House leaders I spoke with earlier this week say they don't expect the Senate to take up the issue until next year. So what does this all mean for you? Well, that's just one of the questions I'm asking in today's panelists. Here on the set with me, we have John Wright, news director at KQAM Radio. And joining us by Zoom, we have from the State House, where he's still monitoring the action, Dion Leffler with the Wichita Eagle. Diane, welcome. John, welcome. Diane, I'm going to go ahead and start with you since we've got you up there. Any word, is the Senate going to take up medical marijuana at some point on Friday or not?
No, it really that just isn't going to happen. There's no indication up here that that's going to occur. So it's a historic vote, but it's also sort of a little bit not that historic because it's only gotten through one house. So the probably the next thing is going to be, they'll bring it back next year. One of the interesting things about that bill though is that it wouldn't allow you to smoke marijuana. You could only use it in other ways. So it's kind of, if you're going to legalize marijuana but you're not going to legalize the smoking of marijuana or the combustion of it, that seemed a little strange to me, but I think you had Gail Finney, who was in your setup piece there, and she made a very interesting observation. She said, she's been pursuing that since 2009, and filed it year after year after year after year, never got a vote, and. So she said, I knew when David Haley and I, who was also an African American, stopped pushing for this, and we got a white Republican to do it, white Republican male to do it, then it'd fly through, and it kind of did, actually.
Yeah, very interesting. I did not know that. I'm hearing this for the first time. And I guess I can't really say it surprises me too much. No. But at the same time, the society has changed over the last 12 years or so. Marijuana was not an industry in 2009, and now, as you and I were talking about before the show started, John, it's growing industry nationwide.
It is a growing industry, so much so 2 points in your piece. One, the economic value that it would bring to Kansas as far as increasing the bottom line for the state. That's a huge crop that is going unharvested for those who are interested in that here in Kansas. They're going to Oklahoma and other states, including Colorado and then out west. Two, the other point was, unless these lawmakers, as in your piece, have someone that is either has lupus, cancer, Parkinson's disease, that they know and love and care about, nothing's going to happen with this issue until, unfortunately, maybe a loved one or someone that they work closely with is impacted and perhaps passes due to the inability for this bill to pass and become effective so that the people who need it can get it. The smoking part, there's plenty of people out there smoking already, okay? so let's clear that McGilla out of the room. So what needs to happen is to get the medical marijuana, yes, it is a thing, legalized so we can move forward to help those who need it. These people really are in pain, they're suffering, and isn't that what all lawmakers are supposed to do anyway?
That's kind of part of the job, one would think.
Yeah.
And as we talk about this issue, lots of questions about what happens next as we go into the next session. And there was also a lot of talk, Diane, during that debate about recreational marijuana, and that some folks objected to that bill, saying that it was a progressive bill that set the stage for recreational marijuana. Still seems to be a pretty set attitude, at least at the State House, against going that far.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a discussion for years and years in the future. I think just to get it this far, I mean, is pretty remarkable. There just doesn't, I don't think we're going to see recreational marijuana pretty much as long as the current majority is in place. It's just not where their head is at on this issue. And, like John said, though, I mean, people are smoking it, and it's kind of ubiquitous. But yeah, I think it's going to be a struggle actually to get the medical side through the state Senate, and I mean, it may be one of those things that they hold hostage for something else.
Very possible. I know when I spoke with lawmakers about this right after it passed out of committee, they were saying we expect it to pass out of the House this year, but not go to the Senate until next year. We expect they're going to want their own bill, but they did expect that by the end of next year, they would have something out of both the House and the Senate. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. Now, not the only thing they're talking about this week at the State House. School funding, just about the last issue lawmakers took up this year, still under debate as we record this show. School funding was back on the negotiating table because of the governor's veto. That earlier bill would have included putting state money into education savings accounts that families could use to send their kids to private schools. The Associated Press reports that on Thursday, top State House Republicans met with Laura Kelly to work out a deal. The legislature can't wrap up its work without a spending blueprint for the state. That includes more than $5 billion for public schools. Democrats worry many of the Republican proposals, including those education savings accounts, will run the state afoul of the courts by shorting the amount promised to public schools under the Gannon school funding lawsuit settlement. And state lawmakers just getting their first look at the resulting compromise as we record the show. We do know a few things that are in it. Full funding for schools, according to the Gannon settlement, uses COVID funding for school safety programs, mental health programs, and communities and schools, along with some other special programs. And it recommends districts give $500 COVID bonuses for those employed in the 2020-2021 school years. And John, you and I have both worked with the school districts a lot. The school funding, knowing how much money they're going to get, is a big deal for them.
It is, because it impacts everyone from, I guess, the dog catcher to those in local and county government, because we have to understand the bottom line, the economic base, which is property taxes, and that affects everyone with a $100,000 home. And so the school district has to figure out whether they're going to have an increase or stay put. So to me, I don't understand why, if this is such an important issue, why are we waiting toward the end of their session to tackle this. Okay, so let's put it on the calendar. I know other things come up, like one issue we discussed about, but if this is so important for our young people, let's put it where it can maybe be discussed early, find a middle, and for crying out loud, let's get a finality to this thing, because we don't want it to go to the courts. It should be handled within the legislature. Let those elected officials do their job instead of having, now people talk about not having government involved. Well, you're asking for the state court to decide what our bottom line is going to be for property taxes. So if you don't want government involved, the folks in Topeka need to get a handle on this and make a decision within the time frame that they're given, so we don't have a cost overrun if they have to go over.
Yeah. And we know we've seen that happen
We've
before.
seen that happen, yes.
Yeah. But Diane, you're following this. I understand they're expecting to bring this up for debate later this evening.
Yeah, and I think that they're pretty much in accord now. I think the current package is going to go through. The education savings accounts, that's been dropped. There was another kind of sticky policy piece of this, which had to do with the what do they call it? The scholarship program, that's more or less a voucher program for private schools, where people can get a tax cut for donating to these scholarships that will allow public school children to go to private schools. It really, they've kept, it started back in the Brownback administration with a $10 million cap on that project, and it's still going to stay at $10 million. They did make some minor tweaks to the eligibility. Students don't have to be in a, quote, failing school if they want to take advantage of that program. They just have to be qualified for free or reduced lunch, and they're expanding it from the elementary grades to also include middle school grades. But really, that's just kind of tweaking around the edges of a program that already existed, and it's probably not going to grow that much.
Now, this is what's called a CCR, a conference committee report. So senators and representatives can really only vote up or down. They can't make amendments to it. Does that increase the possibility that it's going to go ahead and sail through the system on Friday?
Well, I think that this particular package, I'm told, was done in consultation with the governor, and so I'm not expecting a large amount of opposition to it. Generally, if the governor works something out, she'll tell her caucus, and the Democratic caucus, and the Democrats will get on board. So I think that's probably, I mean, yes, anything can be derailed in the middle of the night at the Kansas legislature, which is where we're headed. But this particular package, I think, is pretty close to a done deal. I think it's mostly just a matter of getting it printed and distributed.
All right. Well, the school funding is not just about K-12. Tied up in this debate, worries that not spending enough money on higher education could cost the state millions, if not billions of dollars in federal funding.
Frustrating. Obviously, this is going to be a topic that we're going to have to address.
Representative Troy Waymaster is talking about this warning letter from the Kansas budget director.
When we got that was the first time we found out.
It warns if lawmakers don't put a lot more money into higher ed, the state could lose its federal funding, and not just for education.
Could actually impair funding all across the board for the budget for the state of Kansas.
They're still trying to figure out exactly which programs might be hit by such a loss, but we do know federal funds help pay for things like school lunches, Head Start, and special education grants. What happened? It has to do with federal pandemic aid monies. In order to get them, Kansas had to put a certain amount of money into education, called maintenance of effort. But exactly how much that was and where it had to go was unclear. Then the feds changed how they calculated the amounts, leaving the state between $85 and $105 million short on its funding for higher education.
I think that we're dealing with a lot of different bureaucracies, and we know that the rules are changing and that they're very complex.
Obviously, this is going to be a topic that we're going to have to address when we're putting that final budget bill together.
And address it they have. They've been talking about it all week. But before we get to where that stands, John, let's look at the impact on K-12 schools. Federal dollars go into just about every aspect of K-12 education these days.
It does, from the early lunch programs to after school or snacks for the kids, for support programs. It's just huge. The lawmakers have to make sure that the money is there so that we can meet the federal guidelines. It's maybe a little needle or hand wringing and needle picking, but if we don't get those dollars in there, these other programs that are sustained will not be there. And these young people, they do not have, in some cases, food for perhaps dinner. And those breakfast programs, those lunch programs, after school programs are so vital. Even the latchkey programs and things such as that. I happen to, for full transparency, I happen to work for the USD 259, so I see those programs working. It would be a shame not to meet the criteria so that the federal government can release those funds for those kids.
And there was some debate back and forth over just how much they needed to move around, where they needed to move it. So Diane, I know you've been following the budget, the state budget as well as the school budget. Where does all of this stand right now?
Okay, where this stands right now is that's a bill that's still pending, but really what it came down to is pretty much everybody settled that about $106 million over the next 2 years is what's going to be required to protect the state's ability to get about $1.9 billion in federal funding from 3 different COVID relief acts. So the Senate kind of did the heavy lift on this. Yesterday they came up with $53 million that they could add into the budget for higher ed this year, and are kind of hoping that the government may give them a little bit of leeway next year, but it's mostly going into like scholarships and those kinds of things, one-time spends that because they didn't want to establish a precedent there where they're giving something that's that would be ongoing. And so it was kind of, they kind of did the heavy lift. The House and the conference committee kind of tweaked the edges of it, but I think they've pretty much gotten that worked out, at least for this year. So that's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money for a lot of this money. One of the big reason that they need this money is to help kids catch up, because we've had a year and a half of disruption, odd scheduling, remote learning, and these things are going to fund summer programs, after school programs, to get those kids caught back up to where they really ought to be. So it is actually very, very important that the state get that money.
Yeah. Definitely some
it is
important
very
programs.
important. I see those young people every day, and the ones that come in from remote learning, some are still struggling being in-person classroom. And frankly, the teachers that I've been able to speak with, and that's just at one school, are also trying to get a handle on where is this kid's head at. Because the kid at home was taking care of, in some cases, brother and sister, helping them, maybe preparing their lunch, and then not able to get their work done, which pushes them behind. So it is a difficult task, and hopefully they can figure it out.
Yeah, and we'll have to keep an eye on that, because that is something that has to be figured out.
Yes.
For sure. Well, all of this just part of what's been going on this week on what's called the Veto Session. That session specifically designed for lawmakers to address vetoes from the governor, and this year there were a lot of them. Lawmakers this week had the most vetoes to consider that they've seen in 17 years, most of them overridden quickly on Monday as Republicans prove the power of the supermajority they hold in both houses. This included a controversial tax bill that will require online market facilitators like Amazon with more than $100,000 in sales in the state of Kansas to pay sales tax and 911 fees to the state. It also allows a few Kansans to itemize their state taxes again. Another override came for the Gadsden flag license plate with the phrase "Don't tread on me" Me, the funds going to the Kansas Rifle Association. A third dealt with several election laws, specifically banning anyone but the legislature from making changes to election laws. One attempted override failed in the Senate by just one vote. That's the Transgender Athletes Bill. It would have banned transgender women and girls from participating in girls' sports for state-funded schools.
I have a granddaughter. This was for her and all the other girls and women in Kansas who could have their opportunities threatened. So she's worth it. All of the girls in Kansas are worth it, and we'll keep fighting.
I think that if they bring this back again next session, I think it's pretty clear in everybody's mind this is just intentional bullying. It's no longer about women's sports or fairness.
And finally, this is something that has been going on for a while. Diane, I'm going to start with you. As we look at this veto session, what do you see as the biggest headlines that have come out of this session?
That's a really good question. I think obviously the marijuana thing that we already talked about, that was a pretty big headline. I do think the transgender athlete bill was a very interesting sort of debate going on behind the scenes, because that was a bill that could have cost Wichita 2 NCAA tournaments, basketball tournaments. And the NCAA basketball tournament in the 23 years I've been here was probably the one thing that I saw that really united the community more than anything else. Yeah. So if you're a politician, you mess with that at your peril.
Yeah. Well, in fact, to break in on that, David Haley, who was the swing vote making the final decision on that, said it was the economics that finally decided him.
Yeah. And but that's a big deal. I mean, that is, you start messing with college basketball in Kansas, and you could hurt yourself as a politician.
Yeah. And so, John, as you've been kind of paying attention to this and preparing for this show, what have you seen as the most interesting things, maybe not getting the big headlines, but things that we should be paying attention to?
Well, for me, it's always going to go back to the education. They have equal opportunity, providing access for young people to be able to not only express themselves in the classroom, but prepare themselves for life to go on to higher education. The transgender, because I coach, very much have an ear toward that, and still listening. I've not actually coached a transgender athlete, so I can't speak to that, but I'm still trying to wrap my brain around how it can be fair and equitable to everyone.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are struggling with that. I know that's what David Haley said he was trying to figure out as well. Mm-hmm. Well, finally today, a bill that has already passed into law. Native American women and girls are as much as 10 times more likely to be kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered. The crimes are rarely solved, let alone prosecuted. But one Kansas lawmaker has worked hard to change those numbers in our state, resulting in a new law. Imagine spending your entire life constantly worrying you'll be attacked or murdered.
Be cautious to wear a ponytail because, that they could grab your ponytail.
That's what life is like for Carol Cadu Blackwood. As an Indigenous woman in the United States, she's 10 times more likely to disappear or be killed.
We shouldn't have to live like this. Even though I'm almost 40 years old, I'm always checking in with somebody where I'm at.
Representative Ponkawi Victors is one of 2 Native Americans in the state legislature. She's made it her mission to help change this outcome. The exact number, however, unknown.
What we have found over the years is that there's no data collection, or either we get misclassified as being another race.
The cause? A mess of overlapping, conflicting jurisdictional rules that have law enforcement agencies too slow to respond to missing person reports involving their community.
That's how these cases go cold, because somebody thinks somebody else is handling it and doing it when nothing's being done.
These 2 women joined forces with others in Kansas to fight for a new law that aims to begin changing that.
Law enforcement training is so important, and the tribal leaders of the state and other key groups will all coordinate that training.
And last month, Governor Kelly signed that training requirement into law.
Still in this belief that the governor signed it.
This isn't going to fix all the problems, but it's a step in the right direction.
And it's called the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's and Girls Law. And this is a situation I was aware of it, and of course, Pankawee Victors was aware of it, being Native American, but my colleagues in journalism did not know that this was going on. And Pankawee said pretty much the same thing about her fellow state lawmakers. They had no idea. A prime example of why representation matters, in my opinion.
You want to get me fired up right now, Pilar? Was that an open-ended question? Thinking about this before the show, how much longer are we going to have to deal with this type of issue? Everyone is somebody. No matter if your skin is brown, black, purple, or blue, to lose anyone is a shame and should be addressed and included in every type of training possible with law enforcement, first responders, to learn more about your community, to be involved with these groups so you can hear when these things happen, not say, oh, that's a surprise. Well, we're going back in history here because there was a power struggle. Indigenous peoples lost that. People of color were brought in, still struggling with equality, being recognized as a person. And your station has a program about missing and exploited children every day and cold cases that happen. So, and it's a shame that the data is not collected, not updated, not pursued by those that have the authority and influence to get these things done, because each and every culture needs to survive, or we're not going to get a true representation of what our American history is and could be all about.
Yeah, and that data collection, Dion, is something Pankawee Victors told me will probably be kind of the next step they take. But again, something that we wouldn't know about if we didn't have certain members of the state legislature now.
Well, exactly, and you know, I mean, this isn't a new problem, and it's, you know, I mean, it's something that other states grappled with years ago, you know, and we're not, you know, we're by no means on the forefront of this issue. There are various factors that play into this, and the fact that we are, you know, training basically people, you know, our law enforcement and first responders and how to deal with this is, you know, I mean, that's a good thing.
Yep.
You know, I really don't know anybody who supports the abuse of Native American women.
Yep, and we're going to have to leave it there, Dion. We are out of time. Thank you again, both Dion and John, for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion as well. I'd love to continue the conversation with you on social media. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or PBS Kansas on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We'd also like to thank our news partners at the Wichita Eagle, KSN News, and Cake News for sharing their materials with us. For now, stay safe and have a great week.